Today's guest is Laurence Henry, real estate attorney and president of Legacy Texas Title. We're going to talk about real estate deals gone wrong, common lawsuits, and maybe help you finally understand what title insurance is. Welcome to the podcast. So did you grow up in Dallas?
Grew up in Dallas. Was born at Baylor Hospital downtown. And
Oh, wow.
I think I've lived within Baylor Hospital maybe, my entire life, except for going to undergrad in Memphis. Went to law school at SMU, went to Highland Park High School.
Okay.
So, I haven't strayed very far.
So you're a Dallas, 100% Texan, 100% Dallasite.
Yeah. I think there are like 7 of us, total, that are originally from Dallas.
Maybe a few more, but yeah. Yeah, so you've seen things change a lot.
Oh, yeah. When we were growing up in the 80s, and you'd see banks were changing. Bank of America now, you don't know, but it was a bank called InterFirst, Republic Bank, and then First InterFirst, First Republic, NCNB out of North Carolina.
Oh, these were the precursor to the current Bank of America.
They didn't. And we joked that they didn't even put up a sign. You talk about banks were failing right and left, and when your parents are in the real estate business, that's not a good time to be in the real estate business. That's probably why I'm a lawyer, is because up and down, you live this roller coaster.
Yeah.
It's
So your parents sold residential real estate?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm surprised you didn't just run from the industry.
Well, it's like a family business almost.
Okay.
When you have, grandpa started the lumber business, it's easy for the kids to get in the lumber business and the grandkids, it's just an easy. And so this was just something I was used to. And it's something I enjoyed. And something when I grew up seeing all this stuff, I saw an opportunity. And when you go to law school, it's a very generalist education. Mm-hmm. You're learning how to think more than you are how to draft.
Yeah.
And so you have to figure out where you want to go. And when you get out of law school, you can go into litigation or corporate or whatever, but so you have to really define where you're going to go. And for the most part, you really don't know what you're going to do. They say, your first job is just your first job. And so you go into a lot of different firms or a lot of different companies, and you kiss a lot of frogs, if you will, until you finally find something that works for you. And this just worked.
Okay. I've come to realize that attorneys are like doctors. Like, they tend to get more and more specialized over time. Was that as opposed to being a generalist?
Especially
like you don't see
in major cities.
Yeah.
You might be a jack of all trades in smaller towns, but from a law firm perspective, the only way you're going to get really good at what you're doing is if you're entrenched in it. Mm-hmm. If you try to be a jack of all trades, just like if you decided I'm going to do commercial real estate and residential and condos and doing Oklahoma, and I'm going to do Waco real estate and Dallas, you can't be great at anything. Mm-hmm. So when you really focus on one thing like real estate or title, you get pretty good at it.
Right.
And, people kind of are a little bit not amazed, but they're surprised at how well I know the contract or something, it's because I do it all
that's
day.
What I do.
Yeah. I get calls. I got 3 calls on the way up here just on real estate questions. And so when you're peppered with those, you get used to it.
Yeah. You understand how to think like the contract thinks in a way. Now, growing up, did you know you wanted to be an attorney?
No, actually not at all. My brother's an attorney. He's a litigator, and he knew day one that's what he wanted to do. And, And when I got out of undergrad, I went to a school called Rhodes College in Memphis, and it's just a Division III kind of a liberal arts college. And, that kind of education works well with, going into a graduate degree. And so I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I liked the idea of going into real estate. My parents were like, no, no one, everybody tells everybody else, don't do what I do. And that's what and so I went into law, and I enjoy this. I think I enjoy the residential aspect of it because it's so emotional, because the real estate agents, I'm empathetic to what they're going through, and I've seen it, I've lived it, and I want to try to figure out a way not only to get them out of that ditch, but also keep them out of that ditch.
Yeah.
And it was funny when I first got out of law school, I worked at a title company for a few years as an escrow officer, and thinking I was going to get a legal education that way, but I realized pretty quickly that there's not a law firm that's going to train you in a title company like you would in a law firm. So I had to go back to a law firm, did that for 3 or 4 years, and then I came out and I was underwriting counsel. I worked as an attorney for a title company.
Okay.
And one of the things I had in residential, when I did commercial law, I worked for a company that did a lot of commercial developments, those kind of things, but we didn't do residential at all. Mm-hmm. We did a lot of contracts, but not residential contracts, certainly not the TREC contract. And so when I got out of that, I went into this title side, and all these escrow officers, all these realtors are calling me. And I didn't know my way around.
Like, these people don't know anything.
Well, it's not that they didn't know anything. They were asking specific questions on the TREC contract, the Texas Real Estate Commission contract. And what I did back then was I got a big old plastic, old school, 8th grade binder kind of thing. And I printed every single contract, every single addendum, labeled them all. Mm-hmm. And when an agent would call, I would say, hey, I'm out of my office right now. Can you give me 5 minutes? Try to figure out what they were asking. Yeah. And said, can I call you back in 5 minutes? And then quickly figure it out, try to understand it and call them back. And eventually I got good enough at it.
Now it's memorized.
Now it's memorized.
Yeah. And now you know all the changes. Now you're like, oh, they're going to make this one change. And
well, it's
every couple of years, it seems
every couple of years they do that. And some of it's an evolution. Some of it's based on the law. Mm-hmm. Like if the statutes change and they're trying to modify the seller's disclosure or something like that.
That makes sense.
If they're trying to adapt to law, if something happens, changes in the courts, they try to adapt to it. Or they see a lot of problems, a lot of lawsuits regarding a certain paragraph, they would change that, and so the broker lawyer committee studies it. And one of the things that I tell real estate agents is when they call and say, hey, we've got a situation, we're trying to craft something to tweak this. The first thing I'll say is, we'll try to figure out, is there a form for that? Mm-hmm. Don't try to recreate something when there's a form for it. You're licensed to use a promulgated form. And even if you want to use something else, don't. Because if it goes south, at least you can tell your clients when it goes south, hey, this is the form that Austin created. Yeah. This is something that is out of our hands. Sometimes it's a compromise contract. Sometimes it works out well for everybody, but it's a compromise contract in the sense that it's not perfect for anybody.
Mm-hmm. I'm laughing because a lot of real estate agents are like, well, I write these contracts, and I don't know, they just no, you just fill in forms. Yeah, and I was like, that's very true. You do just fill in forms. It become a contract.
Well, you're selling yourself short. You have to know the forms.
For sure.
You have to know, how not to get in trouble. And not just fill them in, but what does that filling that in mean? Mm-hmm. But there are times when they'll call and say, hey, we have a unique situation. And sometimes I kind of think of it when I'm helping them draft something, can I cover that fault? Mm-hmm. If I screw this up, which I haven't, knock on wood, but if I do, is this a $500 mistake? Can I live with that? If someone calls and says, hey, I want to attach an addendum and build a second story on this house, I'll say, I'm not your guy. Let me help you find someone who can help draft that and represent your client. But if it's something like, hey, we're trying to figure out this hot water heater, or change this date or something like that, that's something we often do. That's something I talk to a lot of people about. Yeah,
we talked about a deal that I have right now we're buying an office condo, and the seller, and there's only 4 condos, and the 3 of the 4 sellers or 4 owners, 1 seller, are suing the developer because the AC doesn't work.
It works in the spring and the fall.
Yeah, but it's partly a problem of just like everybody wants their own thermostat, and it wasn't designed that way.
Right.
So, it's like, how do we put this in the contract? Like, there's not a part in there that's like...
Well, and depending on the circumstances, it may not be something you can, especially if there's a lawsuit involved. Those are the things that...
Multi-party lawsuit, not just the seller only.
Yeah. And your client has to understand that they're getting into that lawsuit as a member of that association. Yeah. And that's some of the... when you do that, that's something you, as an agent, kind of know... as an experienced agent, you kind of know what I know and what I don't know. Mm-hmm. And who do I partner with to help figure this out?
For sure. So backing up a little bit, you got your law degree, you worked in escrow for a while, and then you're like, I want to be in the title business. At some point, you come to be the president of Legacy Texas Title. Can you share with me a little bit about how that unfolded?
We kind of joke in the title business that no one gets into the title business. It's kind of a series of bad life events, life decisions. But so in 2008, I was a president of a division of another title company, and I had been friends my whole life with somebody who was high up at Legacy Texas Bank. Okay. And they decided that they had purchased a small title company, and they decided that, hey, this isn't as easy as we thought it was going to be. And so we partnered with them. and created a Dallas office and kind of oversaw the whole company. And when they were purchased, when Legacy Texas Bank was purchased by Prosperity Bank, they decided that they didn't want to be in the title business, which was great because I didn't want to be owned by a bank and a national outfit like that. And so I decided to buy them out. And it was a great relationship. Most of the time I had under that brand with that leadership was a very great partnership. They let us do what we do. It was almost as if a lot of people thought I owned it anyway. And it was just a pretty seamless transition, easy decision to make.
Yeah, and so now you have an office in Dallas, and I believe one in Southlake too.
Correct. We just opened the office in Southlake.
Congratulations.
We're trying to expand. I mean, we don't want to go out and put flags down throughout the Metroplex just for the sake of putting flags down. We want to make sure. It's
tempting for people to do that. But
when you can take the argument or the saying, build it and it will come. But when you do that, you find that, you're hiring less established people. The two offices we have in Dallas, one's in Lakewood, one's in Park Cities, we try to, and in Southlake included, we try to go out and find the best personnel, the best escrow officers, the best assistants, and then create the office around them. Because when you just have a great brick and mortar, people like, in your business, you don't go to a brick and mortar. You go to the title company because you like the escrow officer.
The relationship,
the technical people.
Yeah. And I've noticed that sometimes escrow officers are very, very seasoned.
Like anything else. Yeah. I mean, sometimes they're very seasoned and they know what they're doing and they know what they don't know. The most important thing an escrow officer or a lawyer for that matter is what they don't know. Because when you go into something and they say, hey, this is the only way it's going to happen. And we had a deal that we were working on last night and I was arguing with the underwriter about it, trying to get it over the finish line and kind of knowing, I started to ask certain questions like, hey, what kind of risk are we taking here? And trying to massage it to get it over the finish line. If we only take the position no, then, we'd turn probably a third of our deals away. We're in the business of risk as an insurance company, but at the same time, we're not risk-free. We have to understand our risks. I mean, they're all legal, but understand it from a business perspective. How do we get to the finish line? And so knowing what you don't know is as important for an escrow officer as it is as an attorney.
Yeah. That's probably good life advice too. Like, don't assume you know everything.
No one's asking me for my life advice.
Fair enough. Nobody's asking me either. I might be offering unsolicited though. Just, there's a tendency to want to pretend you know things you don't, and that's how people get in trouble.
Well, I always joke that, I don't know much, but I just talk with authority. But
that helps a lot.
But, knowing what you don't know really helps you think about it from different angles and trying to think, okay, how do we get there? And if we only think of it in a certain way or only have a, yes and no, this is the only path to this, then most of the deals we won't get there.
Yeah. It's interesting to think about. So backing up a little bit for our viewers or listeners, what is title insurance?
Title insurance, it's one of those things, even in law school. The only reason, I told people I was going to get in the title business and they had no idea what it was. And so title insurance is really, it's an agreement with the underwriter. And we underwrite with different billion-dollar national companies, and it's really an insurance policy that protects them in the event of, say, a seller fraud. So if the seller isn't who the seller says they are, which you joke, but we've had several deals, and I'll explain those in a minute. But if there was a divorce and the ex owned a portion if it wasn't handled correctly, or a death,
heirs could be part of the mix.
That's a huge headache. So if they don't probate the will correctly, or there's some issue there, that'll come back to be a title issue. Property taxes, if they don't pay those correctly, or most of the time we see it's not that they don't pay them, it's they have an incorrect exemption.
All right.
And so if we don't unwind that correctly at closing, there's a over 65 and the guy died 3 years ago, and they didn't probate a will, so the court in the Central Appraisal District didn't know. They still have that exemption, and so they now come back and say, wait a minute, you had this incorrectly, and it becomes a $20,000 issue. So
for the new owner,
and ultimately the title company for title insurance.
Yeah, so you're insuring against a number of things. What's the most common claim?
Most of the time, Texas is a regulated, so we charge the same rate for the same product. So there's no negotiations. And one of the things that Texas does really pretty well is a lot of these things we do behind the scenes creates an opportunity or an environment where we don't have a lot of risks. We cure our own risk if we're doing it correctly. But most of the time it's property taxes. It's occasionally you'll see it where it's an heir that comes back and didn't have an issue. Fraud's a huge business right now, huge issue for us. We've got
what kind of fraud?
I got a call. We insured a transaction a few years ago, several years ago. I was early on in my business, and I got a call. Of course, it was on a Saturday morning. I get a call and
it's the only time to get the call
from an agent, and the buyers ultimately called me and they said, "Hey, we got this letter from some law firm about something," and I thought it was, I'll look at it on Monday, but then I couldn't sleep, so I ran to the office, and what it was the seller had filed a bankruptcy, and there was a large judgment against them, but they had done so 3 or 4 days before closing, and so we couldn't see that because in Texas, really, and say in Dallas or Collin County, when you record a deed today, that document is not viewable to title companies or anybody for probably a good 10 days.
It's still quicker than I would imagine, but yeah.
Well,
but
with technology and stuff, so it's about 10 days now, and so because then the time period is the time period that the county takes to kind of index those documents, and so we're taking the risk as a title company that nothing's happened in that gap period, but we insure it.
Yeah.
And long story short, the seller had done all this stuff and didn't disclose it, and it more or less was a complete failure of title. So the underwriter, in essence, wrote a $500,000 check 20 years ago for this policy because there was nothing they could do. And no one ever comes and says, "I want that house back."
Yeah,
they want a check.
They want cash.
And so that's what we did. And I had another deal a few years ago where it just didn't feel right. It was the ex-husband was in jail. And for some fraud issue, and now the wife's trying to sell the property, but
it's community property state, right? So
they were divorced,
divorced.
And so I dug a little bit and was sleuthing, and that's a lot of our good escrow officers. They're good at sleuthing. If it doesn't feel right, there's a reason. And long story short, I eventually got to the Department of, I think it was the Justice Department, and found some agent, some lawyer there, and I was asking her, do you know this guy? What's the scoop? And she said, "Yeah, you getting ready to close on it?" I said, "Yes." She's like, "We filed a $212 million judgment against this guy yesterday."
$212 million.
It would have been a complete failure of title. I mean, it just, and the buyer had no idea, obviously.
Yeah,
and
not searching online for these things.
No, and nowadays you see all these ads for these, title.
So this was a luxury home too, because poor people don't get sued for $212 million.
This was he had more than just this house. He had a lot of fraud going on.
Of course.
But yeah, so and you see these advertisements for all these protections regarding title on TV.
I hear those on the radio too. Yeah.
And all it does is freak out the world. And they call me like, "Do I need this?" and that kind of stuff. But
do they need it in Texas?
Generally speaking, no.
Okay.
And I don't think Texas is specific. If you're living in that property, somebody who comes and buys a property sight unseen isn't a bona fide purchaser. If they knocked on the door, those kind of things, it's pretty rare. If it was a residential or a commercial property or a vacant property that you're not there, you can maybe use those services in a link and send you an alert if somebody sells that property or changes title, those kind of things. There's also a feature in various counties, like Dallas County, for instance, where you can sign up for that service for free. They'll alert you if something changed, where there's a power of attorney against your name or a deed or something's changed on your property. We had a deal maybe 6 or 8 months ago, where I got a call from the buyer that we insured the purchase of, and it was a vacant lot. And they live in the neighborhood that maybe they're buying this lot for a future development for themselves. And one of their neighbors called and said, Are you already selling this property? And then the wife said, "No, I don't know what you're talking about." And there was a sign in the front yard, and she called me. And long story short, we looked online, and there was a record of a deed from them to this random person. It's just a fraudulent deed. And, notary had been forged. Their names had been forged, and so they had to go to court to unwind that. Ultimately they were fined and protected, but.
That's so crazy, though.
No, there's a lot of that going on. We get alerts all the time.
I always think, too, It's pretty easy to make money in our country. And the people that have all this resourcefulness, I'm like, why don't you just go start a business, like, or start an e-commerce or like an Amazon store or something and make a ton of money legally? Like, why are you applying all of this, resourcefulness to fraud?
Yeah, I guess the fraud's a lot sexier than being in the title business.
Yes. In between episodes, stay up to date on all things home and lifestyle with my weekly newsletter, Into the Weekend with Matt, where I share the latest real estate updates, new videos from our team, and advice for both buyers and sellers alike. To sign up, go to hastingsre.com/ITW. That's HAISTINGSRE.com/ITW.
No, but we're seeing a lot of fraud, a lot of wire fraud. When you go to banks now, they're a little bit more aware of it. So they, ask all these questions. But from a wire fraud perspective, that's one of the things we do all day long is contact banks, say, hey, we're sending this wire out. Can you please verify that this is the recipient? All those kind of things. We try to take as many steps as we can and, warn our clients, warn the buyers and sellers that they're, just like you do, that this is a real deal.
Yeah.
And we've had people that, call us on a Friday morning and say, hey, we're here to close. We said, great. Are you going to send that wire? Well, I sent it yesterday.
What?
Yeah, we haven't received it. And they received a fraudulent email from some person in North Korea or China or Russia or someplace that was just fraudulent, that misdirected their money to something else. And it seems crazy, like how could somebody fall for that?
Yeah.
But the reality is they're emotionally on something else. They're already redecorating the next house. They're focused on something else.
All things are happening.
They get an email from what looks like the title company or something. It has an extra I or an extra T or something in the name. It has the right amount. Everything looks great.
Because it's basically in their email.
They're in their email. Yeah. And they've either hacked the email of the seller. It could be a real estate agent. It could be anybody. I mean, it's pretty hard for them to hack the title company because there's so many layers that we have to have from a federal protection standpoint, from a security perspective. But they get this email that looks legit. The people hey, I'm getting ready to send $214,728. I know that's the right amount. I'm going to send it to the bank, and they get an email saying, hey, by the way, we had an issue with that bank account. We're going to go ahead and have you redirect it so we don't delay closing. That's
they don't
fine.
think anything of it.
Yeah. And then their money's gone.
But a legitimate business, rarely they have problems with their bank account.
No.
Yeah, I always tell my clients to wire transfer their earnest money now. I used to be like, let's just do a check. But I'm like, hey, let's wire transfer your earnest money. And it's almost like a test. Like, okay, you get the wire instructions straight from the title company. I don't give them to you. And it's a small amount. So if it's gone, it's less more. You can recover from that.
It ruins your week, not your life.
Yeah, exactly. And then I said, well, it's going to be the same wire instructions, but the title company can give them to you again, but like it's going to be the same ones for closing.
Well, and you can't overprotect. I mean, people call us, we get it, and we're used to people worried about it. So we listen to them. We don't, judge them or anything like that. We want them to be frightened by the whole experience.
What happened with the people that wired the money to Korea?
They just were done. I mean,
they couldn't buy the house.
They couldn't buy the house. There wasn't any. They claimed it was our problem. We did. We hired a forensic IT guy to come in there and know you having any kind of breach. And it was just because someone copied and pasted our logo and put it on an email and went to Google or someplace and created a new legacy Texas title 1.com or something. And the money was gone. And we, every 3-day weekend, that's a big hot spot because if you send the money on Friday, that's one extra day that the banks can't recover it. If the bank knows within a couple of hours, oftentimes they can go out and
get it like through
SWIFT
or something like that.
But if it's 3 or 4 days, then it's gone. Yeah, the money was gone, and they had no real recourse other than to gnash their teeth.
Yeah, it's not going to ruin your week. It's going to ruin your decade, maybe.
No, it's
man,
it's traumatic. I mean, I can't imagine.
I like when people go to the bank. Like, hey, why don't you just go to the bank and do the wire transfer? Because they're usually going to verify it.
They
Not
should.
always, but I think the good banks are like, let's just double check these instructions. Let's call these
It's another
people.
set of eyes that are more professionally used to seeing those, and so that they might. But the problem we have with banks too is when we call to verify a wire, or say it's cashier's check. They go to Bank of America or some national outfit and said, here's my cashier's check. We also check that to make sure it's a legitimate check. And if it's a big bank, getting to them is like, it's like yelling at the ocean. I mean, you just can't, you can't get anybody there. And so that's its own set of headaches.
Well, this is why real estate agents are always like, oh, you're using Wells Fargo as your lender? Like, are you sure you don't want to use somebody local?
Well, anytime
who will take our calls.
That's it. I mean, whether you're dealing with a national or a title company or a real estate agent or a dentist or anything else, you want to have somebody who's local and accountable. Mm-hmm. And if you don't have a strong relationship with that lender, no matter who it is, if you don't have somebody who's going to be sitting next to you at a baseball game or a church, or someone you can
it all sounds so good on day 0, and then on day 30 when you're trying to close the next day and everybody's screaming.
But I can save $400 if I go to Bank of Idaho. I'm like, and it's
we're not in Idaho.
Yeah, exactly.
Texas. Yeah, that's the pet peeve of agents. So you've seen a lot of deals throughout the years. Tell us about some deals gone wrong. We covered a little bit already, but
well, I mean, I think divorces are tough. Residential real estate.
They're tough just to start with.
No,
before the house is involved.
Residential real estate's emotional to begin with, and then when you go through a divorce or a death or something really emotionally difficult, when you have a spouse, if it's great if they're amicable, but if one wants to make the other one's life miserable, I always tell the agents, hey, if you have a divorce, if you have something like that, let's figure it out early on. Before you list the property, let's figure it out. Or just as you list the property, let's figure it out. Because the last thing you want to do is figure it out 3 days before closing. And now we're having to go to the ex-wife because the divorce decree says, hey, what we're going to do is you get the house, but the ex-wife is going to have to deed you her interest. And then they move on emotionally to something else, and no one does that last step. And so once we get the divorce decree and everything in order, and we say, hey, it looks like the divorce says that, yes, you're awarded the property subject to the ex deeding her interest to you. And now, they're still negotiating over, who wants kids on Christmas or whatever. And this becomes a negotiating tool. Yeah. And it's just a train wreck.
So they use the leverage of the house or other things.
Exactly. So I said, if we're going to have a train wreck, let's have it early on in the transaction so we can recover from it. And so that's whether it's divorce, maybe a trust issue, like if you're selling with a trust, we got a lot of trust issues, but if we have an actual trust that's selling the property, let's look at it because it might be a situation where that's great. The bank will let you cash checks with one person, but something like $1 million real estate transaction maybe requires both trustees or something like that. So we've had situations where in a death, the person didn't probate the will. And so we can rely on other things in the statutes to do it.
What should they do? They should probate the will?
Well, they don't necessarily have to probate the will. I mean, having a will is great because it determines who gets your stuff when you die. Mm-hmm. But there are other things in the probate or estates code in Texas that allow you to transfer your property other ways. Okay. So there's a thing we rely on oftentimes called an heirship affidavit, like the heir to a person. And that allows you to transfer the property based on a glorified, and it's an affidavit that's more or less a glorified family tree. It says, Joe Blow was born on this date, and he had a spouse, and then they had 2 kids, and all this kind of stuff. And that we then use that document to look at the estates code and say, okay, looks like the wife or the junior or whoever gets the property. And if the problem is that the estates code protects kids outside that marriage as well. So if first wife, they had a child, and then now this guy married wife number 2, the kid from the first marriage, if they don't have a will that gives everything to the second wife, then the states code, the legislature basically wants to protect it because they don't think that second wife's going to protect the first kid in the same way that she would her own. And so they have an interest in the property. And we've had situations we've had to go to who knows where to find these kids to get them to sign a deed. And it could be situations where they're in jail. I mean, we've contacted the warden, literally, as crazy as that sounds, to get this person to sign their interest.
Yeah. People don't think about all these things.
No.
Especially on the buying side, because their side is sometimes pretty clean. The buyer, but to actually be able to get transfer of the property, it's like you're saying, could be a little sloppy at times.
Yeah, like I said earlier, it's emotional. They've moved on. They're now measuring for, carpet or, thinking about wallpaper.
Or counting their inheritance money.
Exactly. Yeah, and they've moved on. And oftentimes people think differently, whether it's a will, whether it's a divorce. They think, okay, they said I get this. And they've had that thought in their head for the last 5 years. And now when they go to sell the property, it's not always exactly like either they remembered or like they were told. It might be, subject to this or that. And so that's why we try to warn people, hey, tell us up front before you get really deep in this transaction. And we try to, jump on it as quickly as possible. But sometimes we have to order documents from the court and whatnot, and we're subject to that timeline.
Yeah, and we have pretty quick transactions in Texas.
Generally they're 30 to 45 days. I mean, there could be 2 days for their cash, but
it's a little stressful, but
no, it's doable, but it's a headache. But I mean, if there's a trust or a probate, or even homeowner associations, those cause you big delays. I mean, when you've got homeowner associations are great. They're there to protect the value of the property. And theoretically. And they're headaches too, in the sense that you have to you have to understand that's what you're getting into. There are pros and cons to all of them.
Well, in Dallas proper, you probably don't see a ton of HOAs.
We don't see many.
Minus the townhouses that are not
or
getting
condos.
Or condos.
There are a lot of those.
HOAs. Yeah,
they're oftentimes even local ones. Collin, Denton County. They're oftentimes
Collin County got a ton.
They're everywhere, and they're not a bad thing, but they're oftentimes managed by a HOA outfit, a management company, and we're having to order them, and they, 10 days later we get the documents, and depending on the way that the contract's drafted, the seller may have certain expenses they didn't realize. So I always tell people, let's order those documents just as you list the property, even better before, but just when you list the property.
I do like it when sellers are willing to get the documents before, but it could be a big cost sometimes. I think the state standardized the fees.
Well, they have, but it varies, and there's really very little teeth in that document, in that statute. So the HOAs, while they may be, depending on the circumstances, they may be supposed to do something, there's no jail for them. There's no real recourse. But if a seller is serious about selling the property, it's maybe a $300, $400, $500 expense. It gives them so much information up front, which may save them thousands when they're selling and they're negotiating that contract to understand what they
can write it into the HOA addendum.
And if they don't know that information, then they're blind. And the HOAs will generally redo those documents. If this deal falls through, they'll go to a second buyer. They'll send you the updated information. We don't need all the documentation again. All we need is them to update that form.
The resale certificate.
They're usually do that for a nominal fee, and so it's not just a huge expense that the seller's not going to have. They're going to have it regardless, most likely.
Yeah, I know. That's the tricky part.
Yeah.
So what advice would you give? So you kind of give advice for sellers, like, hey, do your due diligence up front. Like, sort out your estate and your trust before you enter into a real estate contract would be ideal.
Ideally. Oftentimes,
part of that's an agent thing too. I think at Compass, probably a common agent complaint is we have a very robust compliance department, and they want to see ownership records theoretically before the listing goes live on the market.
Well, and the brokerage, the parent company of the broker for any agent is responsible for your activities. So they want to make sure that you're doing everything correctly.
And the insurance is probably really driving those requirements, but it seems pretty wise.
Right.
I had a deal a year ago, and the property was owned by a church.
Churches are terrible.
I was thinking that would be the opposite.
I mean, they're good people, but the corporate structure is usually just a train wreck.
And it was really just a ministry. And there was like a third party that had to sign things, but nobody really knew that, including the listing agent. And then the third party was going to try to extract money. Not going to. They did try to extract money out of the transaction, and it was a huge mess. And the woman found out that they couldn't close on Monday closing day after moving here over the weekend. And so luckily we got her on a buyer lease into the property when it worked out. But that was when rates were going up quickly. And so the lender was willing to lock her rate in for another 30 or 45 days while they sorted this mess all out.
Churches are terrible. I mean, from a title perspective, they're just, they're headaches.
I would have never thought that, but I guess easy theoretically to work with. But they haven't done this.
It's not hard to throw up a church. Meaning that when you want to be a dentist or a real estate agent, you have to go get licensed. There's not the same level of licensing sometimes for churches, and so they don't have the corporate structures and the documents that a real estate firm.
Nobody vetted it.
Well, it's not that they weren't vetted. A lot of times they didn't do the proper stuff. Their corporate documents aren't kept up like they would if it was a legitimate business. Not that they aren't legitimate, but it aren't kept up in the same level. They don't have the same CPA and lawyer guidance that a traditional business would have.
And somehow they often end up with real estate, maybe even as gifts.
Right.
That at some point they sell.
Well, and sometimes a diocese might own the business, or a national charter might actually own the real estate. It can be all kinds of different things.
I haven't thought about any of this, but I guess it can be a little messy.
Run from a church listing.
Okay. Note to self. So what about a buyer? What advice do you give them in a transaction?
Well, I know I'm talking to a real estate agent, but I would always say hire a real estate agent.
Yeah.
And whenever I buy or sell my own property, I actually have a real estate license that I got in college, just from a lack of something better to do. I had parents that sold real estate, and I'll get that. And so I've kept up with it. I've never represented anybody, and I have a law degree, and so I see all this stuff, and I feel like I'm as savvy as anybody, but I never represent myself because you're so emotionally involved in the transaction. You can't see the red flags.
I wouldn't represent myself.
No. And so always, people think residential real estate is something anybody can do because they've lived in a house. It's not like they're buying an office building.
Looking at homes. That's their favorite things. I like looking at houses. HGTV is great.
I've seen all kinds of stuff. But they don't realize that a lot of this is legal stuff. Mm-hmm. A lot of it's negotiating. When I joke in a lot of the classes I teach that I'm the worst negotiator. I go to the car dealership and I'll say, I'll give you X. And they say no. And they say, well, how about 10,000 off X? No. Okay, I'll pay X. And I'm the worst negotiator. And even for my, so I always partner with a good real estate agent to make sure that I'm not, doing something stupid.
I think good agents also know where they have some leverage, and exploit maybe is not the right word, but that's part of your job when you have a fiduciary responsibility for your client is to not spend too much if you don't have to.
Well, and you're not emotionally involved in the transaction.
Yeah.
So you look at it as a business transaction, and you have the knowledge that they don't have. They might have bought or sold real estate before. They don't have the market knowledge of what the prices are, even what interest rates are, who the best title companies are. There's so many different things where the wheels can fall off the wagon that people don't realize.
Right. They're the memes that buyers' dads are deal killers. I'm sure you've seen these memes, that are like, well, I bought my house in 1981. I know what I'm doing.
Yeah, I fear when my daughter is a teenager, I fear when she gets, married and has her first house, I'm going to be that son-in-law's worst nightmare. There's nothing worse than from a title perspective, I'm sure from a real estate perspective, that parents, especially dad who's a lawyer, forget it.
Well, lawyers are tough in transactions. They'll be like, what if we were to rewrite the repair amendment? This is a 7-page repair amendment. We're just changing some light switches.
I tell my buddies who are lawyers, do not bloody up the contract with red ink.
Yeah.
One thing you're telling the other side, you're a lawyer. People do not like dealing with lawyers, period. But, it's a compromise form. You have just so many things you can negotiate in this form. Meaning that you have so many things you could negotiate in a transaction. Spend your time on the important things. Don't spend your time renegotiating whether we should use the word this rather than that. Come on.
Yeah.
People don't get in the title business think it's going to be sexy. They get into it.
Why do people get in the title business?
I think it's those who, lawyerly types, even whether they're escrow officers who aren't lawyers. I think the ideal employee for us, the ideal escrow officer for us is someone who's maybe a third business development minded, a third just a hard worker, and a third who's kind of legally minded, because you've got to know the technical side of it, and it's a hard business to be in. People don't see what we see behind the screen, if you will, but it's a hard job to do.
Yeah.
It's a lot of extra hours on, certain times of the month, and, you're trying to get a deal done. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Or before holiday weekends.
Before holiday weekends. And you also have to be business oriented, business development oriented, in the sense that you want to please people. You want to try to make this a positive experience because we're competing with everybody else in the world.
Well, you can't compete on price.
Right. You can't compete
it's regulated,
price
so it's a service.
Yeah. This price or the actual product. So we're all on service.
Yeah. Yeah, that's tricky. I guess it's the same a little bit as real estate agents. Some compete on price.
Right.
But at the end of the day, it's the service or advice that they can get.
Right. No question about it.
Yeah. So people get into a little bit lawyerly-like for title. You mentioned a moment ago you have a daughter. Do you have multiple kids?
Just one.
Just one. Okay, so raising your family in North Texas. What advice would you give to somebody moving here with a family?
Well, I think Dallas, I was talking to somebody the other day about it. Dallas-Fort Worth is a terrific place to live. People there's nothing sexy about it. There are no mountains. There are no oceans. We don't have this, but what we do have are good jobs, good schools, good people, a lot of land. So if you want to have a house, you can have one. It's a relatively low cost of living. And when I got out of college, Dallas was the last place I thought I would come back to, just because you're ready to discover the world and throw your hat up in the air and all that kind of stuff. But when you realize that Dallas has a lot going for it, it's great from a commute from if you're working through the airport, if you're traveling for business.
Yeah, travel from here is great.
Jumping into DFW, jumping into Love is super easy. It's a great climate to do business in. The weather is relatively,
9 months of the year.
9 months of the year. You don't want to go out in August or September, but other than that, it's great.
Yeah.
And, it's a great place to live and do business. So, I think that's right. And I'm the worst vacationer too, because I'll talk to people in the elevator and try to sell Dallas to a stranger. If they ask
let's hear your elevator pitch on Dallas.
Well, if you talk to somebody's thinking, oh, you're from Dallas, I got a cousin there. I was thinking about, and then forget it. I'll sell them all day long.
Okay.
I think it's I enjoy it. It's like I say, you're not from Dallas. You can appreciate moving here as a transplant. It's a very easy place to live. The cost of living is not crazy. The regulations are relatively low, and so you're not hamstrung from a business perspective most of the time.
Yeah, I mean, practical, I think, is how I really think about it.
Exactly.
Somebody told me, they're like, Dallas is the minivan of cities.
They're
like, it's not sexy, but it's practical. It has everything you need. And I was like, that's a pretty good metaphor for how to think about it.
It's pretty vanilla, but you don't have the swings that you have in a lot of other places. You don't have the extreme weather, extreme business, extreme, who knows what. We're just very low
middle
key.
Of the road.
Yeah.
You're right. It is easy to live here. What are your favorite hotspots, places to go? Things to do. I'm
pretty easygoing. We go to the same places a lot. I would rather go to a place where I know the wait staff and they know me, and we, than be the kind of person that explores all new, restaurants all over town. So I'll stick to the same, places most of the time.
Okay. Do you care to share some of those same places? I'm kind of the same way.
No. Well, we go to a handful of places. We'll stick close to home.
Okay.
We live close to Snyder Plaza, so with the few places there in Snyder Plaza.
Okay. What's the barbecue place there at Snyder Plaza?
The Douglas.
No, I'm thinking of something else.
Well, there used to be a Peggy Sue barbecue.
That's what it was. Did they?
That whole building's gone now.
Oh no!
But that restaurant group owns a bunch. There's a Banditos, which is Mexican food there, and the Douglas is a new higher end barbecue place.
Nice. Okay, I should check it out.
I haven't been there, but it's supposed to be pretty good.
Okay.
We'll go down to a place called Miriam downtown.
Okay.
It's I guess Latin. It's more than Mexican, but it's good. We just a lot of local places and just hole in the walls that we just kind of end up going mostly out of laziness. We go to places that don't require 6 weeks in advance from a reservation perspective.
Correct. I didn't know this existed in Dallas, but last night I had dinner at Carbone, and it took a month to get a table.
Nothing is worth waiting an hour or 8 weeks in advance.
It was delicious, but I'm not accustomed to that. Being up in Plano, to have to wait a month to get a reservation for something.
Yeah, I'm way too lazy for that. I'm way too impatient.
I have the same spots that I go to. I kind of know the time I can arrive, and
right.
Yeah, a little more practical. Well, what do you wish I would have asked you? My last guest told me I should ask people, what are you glad I didn't ask you?
Let me go ahead and open my dirty laundry.
I'm not ready for those questions yet.
No, I think, title insurance is a relatively, just the law in general is relatively boring. It's not sexy. And if I'm doing my job correctly, there's nothing crazy out there that's really worth sharing.
But it does affect our lives big time.
No, as a title person, no one knows what you do. I mean, people know real estate agents, they know banking, mortgage side. They don't realize what we do. And so
they just recognize the expense on their closing, and they're like, what is this for? Well, hopefully we don't have to use it.
Well, and so back in my former life in high school, I was an offensive lineman. And I think they make perfect title people because they work hard and they don't want any recognition. And at the same time, the only time everybody knows you've done something is when they call your name and you've done something wrong.
Yeah.
So if no one hears us, if we don't do anything wrong, then we've done a great job in the title business.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it. Well, I appreciate you taking the time out of your busy day to join me here.
It was a pleasure.
If somebody wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way to find you?
Well, they can call our Dallas office. That's probably the easiest way. They can track me down no matter where I am.
LegacyTexasTitle.com, I think. Awesome. Well, thanks for your time, Laurence.
No, it was a pleasure.
Yeah, appreciate
it.
Have you been thinking about moving to North Texas? Maybe you're looking in Plano, Dallas, Frisco, or the surrounding communities. Each year, our team helps dozens of families make the move to Texas. We'd love to help you begin your journey. Learn more on our website at HastingsRE.com. That's HAISTINGSRE.com.